computer. Yes. Perfect. So, and I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Margarita. It's not Margareta. It is not Friday yet, so I can't say Margarita. I wish it was Friday. I knew I was going to get that wrong, but Margareta, great to see you again, and great to have our extra panelists here. And go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert, for organizing this opportunity for us to talk with your members about the Fair Chance Housing proposal that's going to the County Board of Supervisors. And I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you the laws that we have designed and enacted in the cities of Berkeley and Oakland. The county proposal is modeled after those. And joining us today are two important people who are part of the design of the Berkeley Fair Chance Housing Ordinance. Krista Gulbranson, the Executive Director of the Berkeley Property Owners Association, and Takwa Bonner, leader with All of Us or None. We have a very short PowerPoint presentation that summarizes the ordinance, and we can also happy to share that with you after the presentation. Victoria, can you screen share for us? Great. So why don't I start with just an introduction. I have been a human rights lawyer. I've also been a government official. I was the deputy city administrator for the city of Oakland, and also held positions in housing, planning, and building departments for Oakland. And also currently a teacher of at UC Berkeley in the city planning and the public policy schools. Next slide, please. So my friend and colleague Takwa Bonner will be talking about the process that we engaged in the development of what's considered the national best practice fair chance housing law that passed in the cities of Oakland and Berkeley in 2020.
Hello, greetings, peace and blessings to all. Please bear with me. My head is very foggy, and for a couple of days now, I've been coming down, feel like a cold. Now it just hit me full blown. Well, my name is Takwa Bonner, and I am the housing advocate for All of Us or None, which is a project of legal services for prisoners with children. I am also the lead policy outreach leader for the Fair Chance Housing campaign. Excuse me. So I am just one of thousands of men and women who has just been forced into homelessness upon release from prison, and that's based solely on me having a criminal history, and due to the Fair Chance housing ordinance being passed in Oakland and in Berkeley, I was very fortunate to be able to get a lease of my own, and of course this transformative justice process in Oakland and Berkeley, it is us formerly incarcerated individuals who went out and we spoke with a lot of community organizations, a lot of community stakeholders. We spoken with a lot of the city council members as well as some of the board of supervisors. We also had a town hall meeting in Berkeley and at this point we all engaged with some of the homeowner associations. I'm so sorry. Please excuse me.
Takwa, I didn't realize how sick you are, my friend. I think I can cover the rest of what you were going to say here. So part of Takwa's story is that he was actually employed and was making, a decent wage, but because of his criminal record was not able to access housing on his own, and living with family members would have, because of his criminal record, would have jeopardized the housing status of his family members as well. And I'm sorry, Takwa, is there anything else you wanted to share?
Yes, I'm gonna make it through this. So as you were saying, I'm gonna just pick off where you left off at, as you were saying. So after spending 30 years and 2 months straight inside of the prison system, when I was paroled, I had a mandatory 3-month stay in a transitional facility. Upon within 2 weeks of me being back out in society, I had gained employment, which made the 3 months go by real fast. And as I was coming in from work to the transitional facility, they had informed me that my 3 months was up and I had to vacate the property. And so I packed up all my belongings that I owned and put it into a vehicle, which a cousin of mine who is a preacher out in Oakland, he had blessed me with this Toyota Camry. And so that's where I put all my belongings in. And I attempted to move in with my younger sister until I was informed that I was putting her housing in jeopardy because she's on a Section A. And Section A has a rule that no one who ever been convicted of a felony can live on the premises or the tenant will lose their housing. So I removed myself from her home. I couldn't move in with my oldest sister or my daughter because all 3 of them was on Section 8. So I moved in with my mom and helping her read her agreement, her tenant agreement. I found out that no one who was convicted of a felony could live on her premises, although she lived in a privately owned apartment complex. They still had the same rule. So what I would do is I would come home. Then at this time I was working at Tesla Motors, and I would come from work. I would go visit them in their homes. I would eat with them. I would shower in their homes, and I would tell them that, I love y'all. See y'all later. I'm going home, and my home was in my car. I tried to apply for an apartment complex that they just freshly built up in San Leandro near the BART station. And the line was wrapped around the corner. So when I finally got up to the front of the line to submit my application, on the application, there was a question. The question had read, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And when I marked the box, yes, I didn't realize at the time that I screened myself out, never to hear from them again. I was put in contact with an organization called the Center for Employment Opportunities, and they connected me to a program called Shelter Incorporation. And this organization told me that if I found a place to live, that they would furnish my apartment and they would give me 9 months of rent money. And so I found a place. I located a place. I talked to a manager, and they told me they understood my situation, and they asked me to come in for an in-person hearing. When I got down there, I paid, I believe it was $25 application fee, a processing fee, and 6-7 months later, I heard from them, and they called me and told me, unfortunately, no one has been convicted of a felony could live on the premises. So to make this short, excuse me. So that had been my plight into housing, and this is how I became involved in this organization of trying to get. Let me put it this way: I'm fighting so hard so that no other human being have to go through what I went through, which is sleeping out in the public and in cars. And if you don't mind, Margaretta, I will turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Takwa. And please take care of yourself. We're good. Next slide, Victoria. Thank you. So Takwa's very human story reflects the numbers, the data that exists. We have the county records show that there are close to 500,000 people in Alameda County who have a criminal record, who are directly impacted by the status quo of being unable to rent any form of housing. A research project we conducted with the Goldman School of Public Policy, where we surveyed unhoused residents in Oakland's encampments, we found that 73% of people living in those encampments had a criminal record, right? So this policy very much is about preventing homelessness. And also being able to enable people, to what Takwa shared, being able to live with family members and supporting family reunification, and which we know from lived experience and from the research is the #1 ingredient for reentry success, having family support when people come home from prison. And of course, this is there are racial disparities around who are the people most impacted by mass incarceration, and then when people come home, the inability to have access to housing. So in Alameda County, 48% of people who are on probation are African Americans, even though African Americans only make up 11% of the county population. Next slide, please. So a quick summary of the ordinance, and then we're going to go more into details. Generally, housing providers are not permitted to use the criminal background check in advertisement, applications, your decision-making, or in evictions. And the policy would apply to all forms of housing, private, Section 8, and nonprofit affordable housing. However, and this is something really important for housing providers to know, that your discretion as a housing provider still remains. You can evaluate whether or not someone is going to be a good tenant, looking at credit scores, income requirements, landlord references, eviction history, employment verification. What this ordinance in essence does is requires us to judge people on the merits of who they are today with their current application. All right. Next slide, please. So what would be considered a violation of the Fair Chance Housing proposal? Refusing to rent to someone because of their criminal history. Refusing to continue to rent to someone. Reducing or shortening the amount of time or the term for any tenant subsidy if they're on affordable housing or Section 8. Treating them differently, like requiring extra rent or security deposit, or not allowing them to participate in rental assistance programs like Section 8. are preventing a family member from being able to add another family member with a criminal history to their household, just on the basis of the criminal record. Next slide, please. So there are important exceptions to these requirements, and these exceptions came from a collaborative design process that we had with Krista and her BPOA members. So the first is, we can't change what federal law has to say on this matter. And so if you own a HUD-funded unit or operate a HUD-funded unit, federal law does allow for criminal background checks only after conditional offer has been made, the applicant has consented, and process for people to provide additional information. And there are only 2 automatic exclusions that HUD has, and that is for people who are in the lifetime sex offenders registry and who've been convicted of the manufacture of meth. So the other exception deals with being able to review the state Megan's Law website and to see if someone is on the lifetime sex offenders registry. Again, with certain due process protections in place. There are owner-occupied single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and ADUs are exempt from this ordinance. And the same thing applies. Current tenants who are trying to add a roommate are also exempt from this ordinance as well. Next slide. So how does this ordinance get enforced? Under our proposal, an applicant who feels like their rights have been violated would be able to file a complaint with the county. The county could issue civil penalties. The county could also file an enforcement action, and family members themselves have some rights to file a complaint with the county as well. Next slide, please. So as I said, we included into the ordinance language special rights of family members, given that sometimes people who are under a lot of trauma and stress do not have the ability to advocate for themselves. Next slide. And I will turn it over to Krista for this slide's information.
Great, thanks, Margaret. I appreciate it. Hi, I am Krista Branson. I'm the Executive Director of the Berkeley Property Owners Association. Some of you may know me in other capacities within the state California Rental Housing Association, but primarily with Berkeley. We are an organization much like yours that has been around since 1980, and we represent primarily small rental housing providers, what we call independent rental operators, those who are managing their own property in Berkeley specifically. And this is something that we did get invited to work on with Just Cities. And this was quite a lengthy process for us. We did a lot of discussions behind the closed doors discussions and public discussions to solicit feedback. And this was something that we were sure to ask our own members about. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about our process and kind of where we ultimately wound up with the legislation. So the first thing we did was take the consideration of the impact of a policy like this on owners of rental housing property, especially small owners. And we did that by initially surveying our members. We have about 650 members that represent about 9,000 units of rental housing in Berkeley. And while not all of our members responded to the survey, we certainly had a good number of them that did. And interestingly, we found that more than 50% of our owners didn't always do a criminal background check or do one at all, or even ask about criminal background. That was for a couple of reasons. One is some people didn't know, they already thought that they couldn't do that. And then for others, they felt like, I don't really want to be judge and jury on the matter on certain things. And so it's something that I just feel a little too nervous doing. But it is worth noting that there were still, almost half of our members that did regularly do criminal background checks on prospective tenants, or at least ask the question on the application, which is what this legislation prohibits. Most owners expressed to their elected officials, to Just Cities, to me, that their concern was about violent behavior and property damage issues, criminal behavior in those capacities that may have happened in the past, and that they were primarily concerned about something more recent as opposed to something maybe longer in the past. And they certainly were not concerned about things like DUIs or marijuana charges or possessions or even drug dealing as it relates to marijuana, but they were more concerned about any potential violent behavior. And they also felt differently if they lived on site with the tenant. And that was a really big discussion that Just Cities, Margaretta, and the team and I had a lot to talk about, because there were concerns for people that live on site with their tenant. And so from that, we were able to craft some of these exemptions that Margaretta was explaining that were helpful for owners to understand and feel a little more or less concerned, I would say. But they, we did express concern that this policy could exacerbate continued discrimination against certain community members in sort of an unintended way, because if you have less information to make a decision, you might end up making assumptions about somebody that would cause you to make the same decision. And so we put that out there as a concern. So how did we ultimately get involved in the legislation? We did recognize that this legislation was coming through. Just Cities was very interested in their coalition with community members to make this happen. And so we met with the authors from the elected official side, as well as Margaretta's group. And we had some open conversations about addressing head-on the stereotypes of those with criminal histories. And I actually expressed from the beginning, when I had discussions with them, that I grew up in a situation in which my grandmother allowed people, or specifically sought out tenants when she was a widower, to live in one of her bedrooms in her house that had been formerly incarcerated, because she was a kind of person that gave back to her community. So for me, it really wasn't that unusual of a situation, but I understood from our members' perspective that it was. And a lot of the things we had to address were those stereotypes that are unfortunately present in society about how formerly incarcerated people might act in their future, or might act even in the present. And does past behavior indicate what future behavior is going to be? And once we sort of pushed through some of that, we were able to come to the conclusion that it would be fair and good to go ahead and allow for exemptions to be made for the owner-occupied duplexes and triplexes, but not single-family homes, just to be clear, only if you were sharing a kitchen or a bathroom with the tenant. But if you were leaving the single-family home, you were renting it out, you would be subject to the legislation. And also what's been really important for me, and the last slide I think the team's going to end on this evening, is this impact, a potential impact study moving forward. For us, we really want to know what is the reason for the legislation. Margaretta's group did a very good job of presenting numerous times to both the public and elected officials the reason behind the need for the legislation. And then we want to see the other half of it, which is, and does that legislation do what it's intended to do for TACWA and other people in the community? Do they end up having more opportunities in housing, and how does that work out for them? So that part still remains to be seen. Margaret and I are working through the red tape of government to kind of get there. But I think it's important to note that although we are not entirely in agreement on all parts of the legislation, ultimately our organization did decide to support the legislation with the knowledge that it was coming forward and that we did want to try to open up opportunities for some community members, and more importantly, have those difficult discussions about stereotypes and discrimination against people who have been formerly incarcerated. So with that, I will hand it back over to the team for the last slide before I think we get to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Krista, for that and for your continuing partnership and collaboration. As Krista said, we are conducting an impact evaluation study with UC Berkeley research team to really examine, we had these goals around preventing homelessness, around family reunification, around increasing reentry success. Were those goals met through this ordinance, right? And then we heard concerns from BPOA members and other folks about some potential unintended consequences. Does removing this barrier to housing that people with criminal records have, will that result in increased discrimination and increased stereotyping? That is also something that we hope to examine through the research study. And I think that is it for our formal presentation, and really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback and having a good discussion. So we can stop screen sharing. Thank you, Victoria.
Well, thank you to our presenters. And at this time, we want to open it up to questions. Just raise your hand or go ahead and I think you can unmute yourselves, everyone. If not, just message me in the chat and I'll go ahead and unmute you. But this is your opportunity to ask questions or ask for clarifications or maybe get some input on the upcoming ordinance. I know that it's still in draft form. I believe it is being worked on right now at County Council. That's the latest I heard. Okay. And Margaretta, see?
Good job, Robert.
I know that Krista and Margaretta are able to answer any questions you might have. So with that, anybody have any questions? No? You know, I'm going to start out then. I'm going to ask you a question because.
Oh, I think someone was, I see. No? Okay.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question. So I know Krista and Margaretta and I have had conversations already around this. And it seems to me from looking at the ordinance, you know, and members jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's so many other levels of ways to evaluate potential residents when they're coming into a property. And I think that was something that you and I actually talked about, Krista, that, you know, you have your income requirements. Those can still stay. Members, those can still stay out there. You know, you have your income requirements. You have credit background checks that you can already do. So Krista, maybe bring up some of those other things that on ways to potentially evaluate potential residents.
Yes, I think as Margaretta and Takwa showed in the presentation that, you know, this does not take away your current right to make decisions based on a tenant's financial ability to pay rent, which is still obviously one of the most important things, not the primary thing, but really top of that is, hey, can someone actually pay the rent every month? And so you still have the ability to make those decisions based on income and credit score. You also still have the right to make the decision based on civil lawsuits like evictions, any sort of judgment in that regard. It's the criminal part that you cannot, under this policy, that you cannot utilize to inform you of that decision. So it's not a blanket taking away all your rights. You must house this particular individual. It's just saying that this part of their history potentially is not something you can take into consideration, but there's plenty of other parts of their history that you can take into consideration.
And that's right. And if I may add
Yes,
to
please.
that list, it's also, you can still ask for landlord references,
Mhm.
right? And has this person been a good neighbor and been a good tenant and taking good care of your property, right? All the things, and I've been a landlord, all the things that we ultimately care about as a landlord, all those factors are still in play for your consideration. We just want people to be judged on the merits of who they are today. That's it. That's what this ordinance does.
Great. Okay. Any other questions from anybody on the call? Or any input that you want to give in regards to the potential ordinance?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, please.
What about a home visits? Is a landlord allowed to make a home visit? Oh, my name's Catherine, by the way. I'm using a friend's computer, so I'm not Stephen.
Yep. So all those, the typical lease agreement terms are still there. They still apply. Nothing changes. To what Chris just said, the only thing that would change is being able to look at someone's criminal record, with the exception of what we said, the lifetime sex offenders registry, right?
Those can still be used to evaluate, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
For
Yes.
public health and safety purposes.
okay, awesome.
Yeah, because there's a state law that you can only look at Megan's law for housing purposes if it's to advance public health and safety.
Great. Anybody else have any other questions?
Okay, I have one more.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Well,
Please, Kathy, you said, right?
yeah, Kathy.
Okay, go ahead, Kathy.
Anyway, what's the timeline now? What are the next steps to, and is this gonna go before the voters, or who approves this?
Yep, so this would be, so first, we have not seen the ordinance language from the county council's office. So we actually only shared with you what's in the Oakland and Berkeley laws, because we don't know what is going before the Board of Supervisors. But would be a law that the Board of Supervisors have the power to pass, and it's not a ballot measure for that reason. In terms of timeline, I think Robert may have better information than I do, because it's on the same timeline as the county's tenant protections package, right?
Yeah, and I think actually Jennifer came on the call. Hey, Jennifer.
Hey, Jennifer.
Maybe
Sorry,
you
I'm
can
late.
answer that, Jennifer, for everybody.
I can. Yeah. Hi, Jennifer Pierce, Alameda County. We have not yet seen the revised ordinances either. So I can't speak to those, but what I will say is we are anticipating going to the Unincorporated Services Committee of the Board of Supervisors on February 23rd with draft ordinances. And then depending on the committee's direction, potentially going to the full Board of Supervisors at some point in March. I don't have those dates because the Board of Supervisors meetings dates have not been published yet for March, but that is our anticipated trajectory, although it depends on what the committee members direct us to do.
And those members who are on the webinar, those RHA members that are on the webinar, you receive our emails. And then, of course, those of you who are future members, if you receive our email, we'll inform you of when these are going to be coming up. So if you would like to participate in those meetings, you have the opportunity to. And by then, too, I believe, Jennifer, I'll probably have the language that I can send out to via email to our to those. Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we will absolutely keep you in the loop on all the ordinances, Robert.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, glad you're here with us, Jennifer.
Yeah,
We
thanks for
can
having me,
answer that
Margareta.
question.
Hi, I have a question or comment.
Is that Kathy Langley?
It is. Hi.
Hello, Kathy.
Hey, you. I just want to put in my 2 cents here that the state of California and the counties are working together to protect everyone that's renting. And you're just tightening the noose around the landlord's neck. And so therefore, a lot of landlords are going to pull off the market and sell their homes, which is not going to benefit anybody except the landlord and the profit. So there's my 2 cents. Now you got it.
Thank you, Kathy. Does anybody else have any questions or input on the ordinance? No.
I'll just interject to say that I know this is an unusual forum. I recognize that space and discussion, and often Margaret and I talk that, many times we're most likely on opposite sides of the table. We're both trying to lobby for the interests and the best interests of the people that we represent. And clearly I represent the rental housing providers, and she often represents the tenants and marginalized community members. And the reality is that, we live in a state that is, a lot of us love to live here for the things that we are talking about, which is the different people, the variety of people, the different ethnicities, all the great things that brings to us. We also recognize there's a lot of challenges in the cities that we live in. Alameda County and otherwise are having some very difficult times, especially with the pandemic. But the reality is that we ultimately have to coalesce and figure out ways in which to coexist. And it's not always going to work out exactly as we planned. But my experience here is that this is an unusual forum. It's an opportunity for Just Cities, Margareta and her team to explain a little bit about where they're coming from. And then I am here, and I'm here for a future webinar if Robert wants to bring me in to just have a discussion amongst ourselves so you can sort of understand again where BPOA came from on this legislation. So I will say that I find Margareta's group very open to any comments, even if they aren't necessarily aligned with their thinking, but they are open to hearing what you have to say. And so if you do have some feedback to give them, please do reach out to Robert to give to her directly so that those concerns can be addressed. So I will just put that out there.
No, I
Thank you.
appreciate that, Krista. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Krista. And Kathy, if I may, we're not out to put landlords out of business, right? We need housing providers. It's a interdependent relationship. And as I said, I've been a landlord. I understand the challenges and struggles of being and having that responsibility. The details of the policies that we crafted in Fair Chance Housing in Berkeley and Oakland are very much attuned to, we're not here to get landlords. We're just trying to enable landlords to judge people on the merits of their housing application today. All the things that are really relevant to whether or not someone is going to be a good tenant for you. And, I think this is why we're partnering with Krista and BPOA on the impact evaluation study. So is there something in the ordinance that is putting landlords out of business? We will look at that. It's not something we have heard. We have done multiple webinars with landlords. I think Victoria, over 100 housing providers at this point. No one has told us that they're going out of business or finding it hard to be a landlord because of the fair chance housing law. And that's just the reality. I understand the fear, right? And Krista spoke to that, but there's also a reality here.
And I think, thank you, Margaretta. This also, when I put this out to our membership, I titled it as an informational webinar, that this is an opportunity for members and non-members to come forward and listen to what's being proposed. If you have, hey, well, did you guys think about this or this? You can ask those questions now. You can see these two are very open, Now's your opportunity to ask your questions and throw out any feedback that you feel that, hey, did your team look at this or did you look at that? This is the opportunity to do that. So that's why I'm asking. If you have questions, go ahead, come forward. This is the time to do it.
I was just going to say that I think the other Kathy is, and I don't blame her because I have rental properties all over the state. And it's just something where, I don't, my property managers complain about Gavin Newsom. And, there's no regard for the landlords. And so I think, Kathy Langley is, I'm kind of getting that kind of thing. It's not about this specific ordinance. I don't have, people who are ex-convicts pay their dues to society. And we as landlords need to give them a chance based on, reasonable rent expectations. But, I will say at the state level, landlords are just rode over roughshod, and it's hardship. So anyway, and I think that's part of what's going on. I don't think Kathy, the other Kathy, is necessarily upset about exactly what this ordinance is. It's just where, landlords are struggling. I have a tenant in Reading that hasn't, I don't know, he hasn't paid rent for 10 months, and the property managers, they complained that she didn't fill out the paperwork properly, or the tenants don't cooperate with the property managers. Anyway, it's not easy being a landlord in California. It's just something where it's hard. But, this particular ordinance, I don't have a problem with it. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you for that, Kathy.
Any other questions? If not, you'll get 15 minutes back of your evening, which I'm sure we'd all appreciate.
Also, like, as to what Krista said, I think we're happy to come back. This was the first conversation, but it's certainly not the last.
Awesome. Okay, well, I want to go ahead then and thank our presenters, Margaretta and Krista. See, got it right. 3 for 3 now. Thank you, Javier. Takwa, take care of your cold. Victoria, thank you for running the slides. Members and non-members, thank you for being here this evening. We will have this sent out, and probably